Hi, and welcome to Cúirt. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Sasha de Boyle, Director of the Cúirt International Festival of Literature, and I'm really excited to be introducing you to our first ever digital festival. I hope you enjoyed this event, and if you do, why not take a moment to see what else we have in store online at cúirt.ie. All our events will be broadcast live until the 25th of April, but if you want to watch or listen again, you can find them all online on our website, our SoundCloud, or our YouTube channel. Please feel free to join the conversation on social media. We'll be using the hashtag Cúirt2020 across Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram throughout the weekend. If you'd like to make a donation to support Cúirt, you can do so at cúirt.ie/support us. And after the event, we'll be sending out a post-event survey and would be very grateful if you were able to fill this in. We can't be there with you, but we hope we can bring a little of the Cúirt spirit to you wherever you are in the world. Thank you.
Hi there, my name is Jessica Traynor, and I'd love to welcome you to this reading of two poets of international renown, both of whom are writing work that I really think speaks to the strange times in which we find ourselves. Carolyn Forché and Kei Miller. Kei Miller is a Forward Prize-winning poet and novelist whose books have explored his Jamaican heritage, post-colonial questions, identity, and place. His 2014 Forward Prize-winning collection, The Cartographer Tries to Map a Way to Zion, explored the gap between what we can map and what we can know, through the language and dialogue between a mapmaker and a Rastafarian, probing that disjunction in language familiar to all post-colonial nations. His latest collection, In Nearby Bushes, probes even more deeply into these questions by exploring the liminal, in-between spaces of the Jamaican landscape in an intimate, disturbing collection of poems, which explores the things that dwell in or escape into local forest. Through Miller's precise lens, these spaces become places where forbidden tenderness can flourish, where the moon reveals the shapes of shoulders floating, and where displaced reindeer, surviving against the odds in tropical climes, can teach us how to belong where we do not belong. Carolyn Forché is one of America's most lauded poets, celebrated poetry and her years of activism. We've all waited eagerly for her latest collection, In the Lateness of the World, since the publication of her astonishing Blue Hour in 2003, a moving and complex exploration of motherhood and anxiety. In the Lateness of the World is a collection that converses with her 2019 memoir, What You Have Heard Is True, and expands upon themes that have shaped her career: war, death, travel, hauntings, and how place and memory are shaped by echoes of human pain. In the Lateness of the World is awash with beauty and finds hope in its journeys across North and Central America and a Europe teeming with unquiet history. In these countries sculpted by war and migration, where people float from war to war, Forché has the vision to see the beauty of the human spirit that allows a migrant taxi driver to promise, "I will see that you arrive safely, my friend. I will get you there." Both of these poets' collections are so attuned to the currents of human life that they feel somehow prescient in the current crisis, both mourning loss and violence, yet finding pockets of beauty among the devastation. I'm delighted to welcome you both here today, Kei and Caroline. And Kei, I wonder if you might start us off by reading some of your poems.
Right, yeah, I'm happy to read it first. So I'll just share three poems from this collection. I'll start with Here Where Blossoms the Night. There, there's a character in here, by the way, who's a nanny of the Maroons, and in Jamaican folklore, she was one of the Maroons who, in Jamaican folklore, we say that she was able to catch bullets in her ass and shoot them back. It'll be useful to know that. Anyway, Here Where Blossoms the Night. Here where blossom the orchids, 220 in variety. Some have adapted to bone dry places, to being purple amongst the stone. Here where blossom Jamaican ladies of the night, I mean the flowers, their petals the colour of weddings, their perfume, the scent of parlours. There is much that blossoms in these bushes, and much that rots like Jamaican ladies of the night. I no longer mean the flowers. Here, where grows the hog apple, the hog money, here, where wild hogs rut at the roots of things, the trees sometimes are grunting. Here, where you can find the tuna, here, the monkey's hand, the cow's tongue, such things seem not to belong to bushes, but they are as much a part as the bullock's heart, the dog's tail, as much a part as the broken bottles and burnt cars. Is that the right way to say it? Especially here. Should I have said the heap brook brattle and the plenty bun up car here that cannot be held by the small arms of language here, that cannot be held by the small arms of English here, that cannot be held by the English, but how they tried. Here is where they found Nanny, or where Nanny found them, where you might find her still if you believe in Kumina, the never dead of spirits, Nanny. Do you know her story? Her peculiar ability to catch bullets and where some say she could even shoot them back, but I think this was just a metaphor for the magnificent stink of her farts that coming across a white man, she could just lift up her frock tail and clear the bush of English hair, whereas the inscrutability, the wild and passionate uproar here, whereas the horror here, where you might find the war here, where blossoms the knife here, where blossoms the blade here, where glistens the blood. The wild mint grows here, and the wild pawpaw, and the wild sage, and the wild caesarobia. So much wildness can be found here, where creeps the cerasy, the love bush that strangles trees here, where shines the raw moon being folk etymology, original word Ramoon, here, where you will find the much improved names of things, the slow greening and rootsing of Latin. Semen contra becomes semi-contract. Semper Vivum becomes Simple Bible, becomes Simple Bible. Let the trees say amen here, where blossoms the ginger here, where blossoms the danger here, where you must pray against the loud bark of cedar, seek God in the orchids, ask help of archangels, though here archangels are only flowers, their petals, the color of weddings, their perfume, the scent of parlours, by which I mean the heavily powdered dead, this landscape like a wreath laid against itself, here where blossoms the natto, here where blossoms the nettle, here where blossoms the night. So I'll move on from that and the poems, as you'll hear, they're always exploring what's happening in this landscape that I'm fascinated by, the nearby bushes. Uh, and here's a poem you mentioned in your introduction. Uh, just a fascinating thing about Jamaica, because I think we have this, I don't know, in post-colonial countries where we have a kind of chip on our shoulders and we're always trying to prove ourselves. And so we do strange things. And so in 1988, someone decided for a Christmas show to take down six reindeer to Jamaica. Uh, but the next year, a hurricane came, and the six reindeer escaped into the wild, into the hills of Portland. And a recent survey of deer in Portland, Jamaica, estimated that the population of Jamaican reindeer now stands at about 6,000. Uh, and I decided to write this poem here, where run the wild deer. Here where run the wild deer, the Caribbean caribou. Does this surprise you? Deer without snow, not even the possibility of snow here. They are like echoes of a long story, the brutal history of this place, which is not to say they are not their own stories, but that they know, as we do, the tightness of ships and how to lose whole continents and how to be wary of white men wielding whips and how to end up here. There is such a thing as the perfect storm. It includes an actual storm, and there, in weak cages and nearby bushes, how wonderful to escape into hills that have always been escape. They are the new maroons. At dawn, they descend on quiet hooves to loot from the estates, but maybe that isn't fair. I shouldn't say estates but farms. On the 7 o'clock news, a man spreads his arms to show the field of ruined carrots. Have mercy. Them ever God Almighty thing. And then he faces camera, but is looking somewhere beyond the absent harvest, his mind lighting on memory. But Jesus Christ, he breathes. Them so pretty. His face now a curious thing, as if ashamed or puzzled he should recognize such beauty, the nobility of their being, or accepting too late this may have been their payment, the price of carrots to be seen. It is easier to hear the dare whose sounds are like doors on old hinges at nights. Listen, the landscape is creaking these bushes these bushes just now opened themselves to drunk men just now stumbling home here, where the wild dare roam here, where dried branches may not be dried branches, but the majesty of antlers here, where white flowers may not be white flowers, but the blossoming of their tails, the strange warning of dare. We do not see well, but we sense you are here with us in this strange, strange land. Will you come now to the river? Will you teach us King Alpha's song and how to survive Babylon, how to belong where we do not belong? And I'll read a final one. Uh, and the occasion of this poem is strange. I have so many friends on Facebook, and many of them I don't know. Uh, and I ended up just by accident watching a Facebook Live video of someone I, I, I don't know at all, but we somehow ended up as friends on Facebook. And uh, Jamaica has this reputation for being a quite homophobic place, and in many ways, I think that reputation is unfair these days. I mean, Jamaica is growing up; it's changing. There's a lot more space for queer bodies, and so for me, sometimes when you see the flare up of that old kind of violence, it still surprises me. I think, oh my God, that's still true for some places and for some people. And so this Facebook Live video I was watching was of a boy who had to escape the community in which he lived. And there was one small thing that he said, which I thought immediately because of the collection I was writing, I had to write the poem. And the thing he said was, which becomes the epigraph of this poem, and I'll read it in Creole, I'm sure you'll understand. He said, uh, when me leave, me have to go through the bushes, as if me did take the road, them would have killed me. When I left, I had to go through the bushes because if I took the road, they would have killed me. And so the poem is a psalm for gay boys. Here that is the confession and the truth and the softness amongst the thorns, where the married men roam at night, their trousers unzipped, where we are kissed by the same lips that curse us, where we suck the salt from each other's necks, but only at night, where we hide, where we are never hidden, Where are the shadows? The shadows being our refuge and strength, a present help in the day of judgment. Where is the judgment? Where is no judgment? Where is the escape but only at night when the married men chase us and curse us with the same lips? Where we run to? Where we stop running? Where men hang their jackets in trees? Where the moon reveals the shapes of shoulders floating, like Scott's apostrophe to pain, a landscape of strange lynchings? Where is the sobbing? Where is the eyeing? Where we trace our fingers against each other's bare and trembling backs? Where we kneel? Where our mouths are full of things harder than prayers? Where is the away from home and the way home and the roadway in the wilderness and the way where there was no way, where we come to again and again and again? Here, that is the limboed land, a place between places, the ends of the earth. Here, that is the hear my cry, O Lord, my God, attend now to my needs.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for that, Kai. Absolutely stunning reading. And what a place to finish it in that kind of absolutely transcendent moment. Very beautiful. Would you like to read some more poems for us, or are you happy enough with that?
Oh yeah, I'm happy with that. Did
Oh,
I
read
not
it.
take enough time?
Okay, perfect. I just wanted to check because Dave, I'm sorry, I'm giving you editing work, but I just wanted to check I hadn't jumped in before you were done. But no, thank you so much for that, Kai. That was just beautiful and a wonderful rendition of the various different tones and moods in the book. And it really is a collection of sharp contrasts of dark and light, and I'm really looking forward to talking a little bit more about that in a little while. Thank you so much. And Carolyn, will you read for us now, please?
Yes, thank you very much. And thank you for bringing me to Ireland this way and to Cúirt. I loved your reading, Kai. It was wonderful. So I will begin with the boatman poem that you quoted in the introduction. I spent some of the past 7 summers in the Northern Aegean, and for some of those summers toward the end, people were dying in the Northern Aegean, refugees. And a couple of years later, I was teaching in the winter in Milwaukee, and it was cold. And so sometimes I was too cold to walk, and I would take a taxi, and accidentally the same taxi driver would always happen to pick me up. And so we came to know each other. And when he would bring me to my destination, he'd stop the taxi and we'd just talk while the snow fell. And he told me his story. He was from Homs, Syria. The boatman. We were 31 souls, he said, in the gray sick of sea, in a cold rubber boat, rising and falling in our filth. By morning, this didn't matter. No land was in sight. All were soaked to the bone, living and dead. We could still float, we said, from war to war. What lay behind us but ruins of stone piled on ruins of stone? City called Mother of the Poor, surrounded by fields of cotton and millet. City of jewelers and cloak makers, with the oldest church in Christendom and the sword of Allah. If anyone remains there now, they would be utterly alone. There is a hotel named for it in Rome, 200 meters from the Piazza di Spagna, where you can have breakfast under the portraits of film stars. There the staff cannot do enough for you. But I am talking nonsense again, as I have since that night we fetched a child, not ours, from the sea, drifting face down in a life vest, its eyes taken by fish or the birds above us. After that, Aleppo went up in smoke, and Raqqa came under a rain of leaflets warning everyone to go. Leave, yes, but go where? We lived through the Americans and Russians, through Americans again, many nights of death from the clouds, mornings surprised to be waking from the sleep of death, still unburied and alive, with no safe place. Leave, yes, we'll obey the leaflets, but go where? To the sea to be eaten? To the shores of Europe to be caged? To Camp Misery and Camp Remain here? I ask you then, where? You tell me you are a poet. If so, our destination is the same. I find myself now the boatman, driving a taxi at the end of the world. I will see that you arrive safely, my friend. I will get you there. Thank you. I will read now a poem that has a little bit to do with Ireland. It's a poem that has Hook Lighthouse in it. I love to visit lighthouses, and was shown my first one in Ireland at night when it was actually working. And this has the history of lighthouses, but like all poems, it isn't actually about lighthouses. The Light Keeper. A night without ships, foghorns calling into walled cloud, and you, still alive, drawn to the light, as if it were a fire kept by monks. Darkness once crusted with stars, but now death dark, as you sail inward. Through wild gorse and sea wrack, through heather and torn wool you ran, pulling me by the hand so I might see this for once in my life. The spin and spin of light, the whirring of it, light in search of the lost. There, since the era of fire, era of candles and hollow wick lamps, whale oil and solid wick, colza and lard, kerosene and carbide, the signal fires lighted on this perilous coast in the Tower of Hook. You say to me, stay awake. Be like the lens maker who died with his lungs full of glass. Be the yew in blossom when bees swarm. Be their amber cathedral, and even the Cistercians will be kind to you. In a certain light, as after rain, in pearled clouds or the water beyond, seen or sensed water, sea or lake, you would stop still and gaze out for a long time. Also when fireflies opened and closed in the pines, and a star appeared, our only heaven. You taught me to live like this, that after death it would be as it was before we were born. Nothing to be afraid, nothing but happiness, as unbearable as the dread from which it comes. Go toward the light always. Be without ships. So I will read a little poem about the deaths of the forests in Western North America. This is because of global warming and the winters that don't come. Morning on the island. The lights across the water are the waking city. The water shimmers with imaginary fish. Not far from here lie the bones of conifers washed from the sea and piled by wind. Some mornings I walk upon them, bone to bone, as far as the lighthouse. A strange beetle has eaten most of the trees. It may have come here on the ships playing music in the harbor, or it was always here. a winged jewel, but in the past was kept still by the cold of a winter that no longer comes. There is an owl living in the firs behind us, but he is white, meant to be mistaken for snow, burdening a bough. They say he is the only owl remaining. I hear him at night, listening for the last of the mice, and asking who of no other owl. This is a poem called Toward the End. And it came at the end of writing this collection, which took 17 years. So, and I wasn't quite sure where it came from, but I think I know now where it may have come from. Toward the end, in this archipelago of thought, a fog descends. Horns of ships to unseen ships, a year passing overhead, the cry of a year, not knowing where, someone standing in the aftermath who once you knew, the one you were then, a little frisson of recognition, and then, just like that, gone, and no one for hours. A sound you thought you heard, but in the waking darkness is not heard again. 2 sharp knocks on the door. Death it was, you said, but now nothing. The islands, places you have been, the sea, the uncertain, full of ghosts calling out, lost as they are, no one you knew in your life. The moon above the whole of it, like the light at the bottom of a well opening in iced air, where you have gone under and come back. Light, no longer tethered to your own past. And were it not for the weather of trance, of haze and murk, you could see everything at once, all the islands, every moment you have lived or place you have been, without confusion or bafflement. And you would be one person. You would be one person again. And I had a poem that I wrote when I was going through chemotherapy. And I read it differently now than I did then. At the time, it was to reassure myself that I would make it. And now I read it as a poem of reassurance to everyone. And it begins with an epigraph by the French resistance poet René Char. I have brought from despair a basket so light, my love, that it could have been woven of willow. To speak is not yet to have spoken, the not yet of a white realm of nothing left, neither for itself nor another, a no longer already there, along with the arrival of what has been, light and the reverse of light, terror, as walking blind along the breaking sea, body in whom I lived. The not yet of death, darkening what it briefly illuminates, an unknown place, as between languages, back and forth, breath to breath, as a calm in the surround rises, fireflies in lindens, an ache of pine. You have yourself within you. Yourself. You have her. And there is nothing that cannot be seen. Open to the coming of what comes. Okay. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for that, Carolyn. What a beautiful kind of hopeful reading. And I think, that this collection really seems to be a collection of poems that find such beauty in the Anthropocene, in the current moment that we're living in the lateness of the world as you have it, without refusing to look at more anxiety-inducing aspects of contemporary life, and and while taking a very unflinching look at war, migration, and all of the things that I think have defined and shaped your career as an exceptional poet. I hesitate to say political because we might talk about that in a little bit more detail. I always use the word political as a compliment, by the way, but I know it's one of those kind of contested terms in poetry sometimes. So just again, I'd love to thank you both for those readings. They transported me to very different places while also bringing me home. And I'd like to talk a little bit about that in more detail with the two of you for the rest of the session. But first, Kei, I'd love to ask you a question. I have just been reading and rereading In Nearby Bushes because I feel that it's a collection that on first read offers so much, but then seems to make and unmake itself again while it's reread, So I've been enjoying it, and I've been enjoying going back over it and looking at the kind of the erasures and the various different kind of amendments as the collection kind of unravels, while also bringing back to the first principle of all of those here, where beginnings. And I'd just love to know a little bit about when the phrase that's repeated so many times, in nearby bushes, first jumped out at you. When did you first notice the repetition in these various news reports of this little important three-word phrase?
It's impossible in Jamaica not to be very familiar with that phrase. I think the surprise for people who are from Jamaica is that I decided to throw language at the phrase. But the phrase it's so everyday. We make jokes about it all the while. When we say, yes, so it is impossible not to recognize it. Every news report, the gunmen escaped to nearby bushes, the thieves, the body was found in nearby bushes. So we make kinds of jokes. We see people doing kind of deforesting activities, and we said, and Jamaicans will say, it's so easy to solve the crime situation in Jamaica. You just have to get rid of the bushes. Because without bushes, there's no more escape. So I guess I just decided to do that thing that poets do, that for a phrase that has become so everyday, so common, so we say it without thinking about it. What happens when you throw language at it? What happens when you decide to explore this place that is always imagined but never actually imagined? Because we talk about the nearby bushes, but it's clearly a place we don't want to end up in, because that might mean death. So I think it suddenly seemed to represent everything that I was thinking about. Places as there but not there, as here but not here, as kind of impossible, as what becomes the difficulty of location in something like that. So yeah.
And I think, yeah, and I think as well, especially in kind of post-colonial landscapes, these liminal spaces, these in-between spaces become kind of freighted with meaning. And when I was reading the book, I was thinking about how Edmund Spenser described wooded territories in Ireland in the 16th century, and when he describes in the aftermath of a rebellion these kind of starving rebels kind of crawling desperately out of the bushes. And he says, out of every corner of the woods and glens, they came creeping forth upon their hands. They looked like anatomies of death. They spake like ghosts crying out of their graves, and there's this sense of the kind of the colonized people and their ability to somehow merge with this wild landscape, and somehow the landscape speaks of their wildness as well, and of their potential for violence. And I think it's a kind of a meaning that's placed upon place in so many different societies. And I'm intrigued by how you explore that. And even, in I think it's Here Where Blossoms the Night, you have the horror again, with that kind of notion of heart of darkness. And I'm just intrigued, again, as I said a minute ago, there's such a contrast of light and dark in the poetry. you absolutely explore the complexity of these spaces. And how did that feel? You know, how did you go about kind of approaching that? Because what I love about the collection is, you know, these places are never, they're neither one thing nor the other. And I think you really seem to enjoy that paradox.
Yeah, I mean, thank you. I'm not sure it's I mean, probably it's that those are the things that I enjoy, that I think as a writer, the things that fascinate me, the things that demand exploration are the things that are neither one thing or the other. It the things that I feel that we haven't thought through it with the kind of complexity that it deserves. And so I think it's that the thing has that duality or that complexity that draws me to it in the first place. Uh, and you're right, the nearby bushes or just that landscape is exactly that, that it is such a terrifying place, and it can be. And yet, as you know, the post-colonial subject, you're wary of falling into that trap of demonizing your own location, of demonizing that thing that is a part of you. And so how do you admit to both things, that there are things about this landscape that can be terrifying and can be terrifying to the very people who live in that space, and yet that space can be a place of healing and energizing. It's, you know, if you think about Marinage, it's certainly the place where we regrouped, and you know we found strength in order to overcome all these things. So yeah, it was. I think that was fascinating. But the richness of those dualities, I think they surprised even me as I was exploring it. To be honest, I mean, I don't think that's something that I've come to the end of disentangling. One of the I didn't know this word before. I didn't know that a word for that kind of landscape, the shrubbery, was understory, which I talk about in one of the early poems. And that just seems such a fascinating thing for a writer, that of course it's an understory. Of course there are stories happening underneath it, and plots and narratives and twists and dialogue that are there. And if we just listen to that tangle of stories happening underneath, then that might be interesting. But I think that's what I was trying to do more than anything.
Yeah, I think now more than ever we do need to listen to landscapes. You know, it is important, I think, and I think you've really summed that up so beautifully. Carolyn, did you want to say something?
In fact, I was in the third poem you read. The young man escapes through the bush rather than through the road. He fears the road more. And so the bushes become, even you're describing them as a place where the dead bodies are found after crimes and things like that, a place that is feared in itself. All the more poignant, this poem, this young man finding it preferable to go through the bushes.
Right, absolutely. Yeah. and so in a way he becomes, yeah, I mean, that he should prefer this landscape of death, that he should go into it willingly, by itself says so much. But almost like the dare, I'm thinking about these unlikely people who become the Maroons,
Yeah.
who, and both of them, that's the landscape that gives them that identity. And I was just thinking about how in Jamaica, it's so easy for us to celebrate Marinage, but not think about the people who are practicing Marinage today, and who are inhabiting that history, and all of the dignity that comes from that history, I think.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Carolyn, I'd love to move on now to you and ask you a question, I suppose, about in the lateness of the world. It's a collection that is very elegiac in tone, but also warm and hopeful. And I think that the great warmth that runs through the collection for me comes from all of those dedications in the poems, that you don't discover till the end necessarily, but that you feel that there is a dialogue constantly happening between the poet and various companions, some of whom, like the poet Ilya Kaminsky, are still very much here, but others who have shaped your life and career, and who are now gone. And I'd love if you could tell us a little bit about Leonel Gomez, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, and who's the inspiration behind The Ghost of Heaven and Ashes to Guazapa, which are two beautiful poems, but who also, I think, had a lot to do with the shaping of your career and your recent memoir too.
Yes, so thank you for noticing that, because there is a dialogue between the poetry book and the memoir. But Leonel was the cousin of a poet I had been translating when I was young. I was translating Claribel Alegría, who was born in El Salvador and grew up in Nicaragua. And I spent the summer with her in Spain, working on the translations. And the following fall, the young 27-year-old me returned to her teaching job in California, and my doorbell rang one day, and there was a stranger on the porch with his daughters, and it was Leonel Gomez, who was this cousin of Claribel, who had driven all the way from El Salvador with his daughters because he felt that war was coming and to his country, and he had a curious he was on a curious errand. He wanted a poet to come to the country right then so that they could learn about the country and come back to the United States. This was going to be a poet from the US, so that this poet could somehow influence Americans regarding the war by understanding its causes and perhaps preventing American military intervention. It was madness. I tried to explain to him how poets are viewed in the United States, and definitely we do not have very much influence on foreign policy decision making, but he was convinced that it was really important for poetry to be involved here. So it was, I was young, and I wanted to know the world. I suppose there are many reasons, but I accepted to go. And I arrived in El Salvador in early 1978. And it was the time of the death squads. It was a really brutal time. And I made many journeys there, long journeys there, until March 1980. And it was a week before Monsignor Romero was assassinated. And I did a lot of work there, and I learned, my eyes were open there. And I consider Leonel Gomez a profound influence on my life. He was my guide and my teacher. He was brilliant. He was exasperating. He was funny. He was dedicated to the betterment of the lives of the poor. And that was his life. And so the memoir really is about him rather than myself. And the two poems, he died on Thanksgiving Eve in the our Thanksgiving in the U.S. That's how I remember the date, November 2009. He died of heart attacks in San Salvador. And I had just been with him there, and I'd gone home, and I went back to scatter his ashes on the Guazapa volcano, where most of the war was fought. So El Salvador has been a very important place for me.
Great, thanks for that. And I think, listening to you speak there, Carolyn, I was struck again by the line in the Boatman where the taxi driver says, "You are a poet." And I think there's this sense in the work about the gift of a faith in art, because I think a faith in art is faith in humanity. And it feels like, in a sense, that was the gift that Leonel gave to you, that you have now as a poet, that I think can be passed on. And I think there's a huge amount in the collection about the consolation of art and the Nabokov quote on the comforts of art. And one of the things I love in the collection is how you bring us from this kind of Paleolithic first elemental art right the way through to the descriptions of the weaving of a rug and the colours and tapestries on the wall and things like that. And does that sense of the permanence, in a way, of the drive to create art, is that a comfort for you? Do you find that a comfort in your own work?
I think so. In the book begins with the human dawn, when in Paleolithic time, people dragging stones and positioning them so that the light of the sun comes through at a certain time. I found that very moving, and I find the cave paintings that have been hidden for millennia very moving as well, Chauvet and so on. And I became interested in our species and what we do all over the world through time, how we expressed our humanity. And now in this pandemic, the species is all at once experiencing something together that is a threat to our species. And I think in a certain way shows us how together we are, how much we are one, even though we are very isolated now. And for me, I think that tracing of human making throughout the book became important. All forms of art and expression, and because this is who we are and who we were. And I want to honor that in a time when humanity is in peril together.
Yes, yeah, I think that's a very striking observation, actually, the togetherness and the kind of the shared experience that we have at this one moment with the current COVID-19 crisis. I think you're right. I think, again, to use the word that's banned, unprecedented, but it is unprecedented in that manner. And I think, again, we are in ways, while mourning our own losses and the losses around the world, at a moment where we might be able to take the opportunity to imagine something different. So I think many of us hope that won't be lost. I kind of moving on in terms of ways of expression and back to politics a little bit. I really enjoyed the poems in the book that dealt with, I suppose, your own kind of personal history and the things and the ideas that haunted your own upbringing. And early life is one of my favorites, and I love the notion of this kind of omnipresent world war that can never be directly referred to except in terms of its ending. And it made me think of something that you've said about that generation or generations that kind of grew to literary maturity, I suppose, from the Second World War up until 9/11 in the States, and how political poetry was perceived in that era as something that maybe was a little bit distasteful or unseemly. And how you found yourself kind of slightly pigeonholed because of the work that you had done in your early collections, reflecting Central America. Do you think that is changing now in terms of contemporary poetry in the States at the moment?
I want to thank you for your very deep and thorough reading of the work. It's so impressive, the questions you're asking. To accuse someone of being political in the United States, it is a pejorative term when applied to literary writers and poets, but it actually means anyone who is oppositional to the status quo, anyone who makes someone else feel uncomfortable. It doesn't mean that you're politically active or that you're an activist or anything like that. You don't have to belong to a party or go to meetings every night in order to be accused of being political in the US. So it's a strange term, and I think for many decades following the Second World War, and in part having its roots prior to that war, it was prescribed to be political at all in your poems. I didn't know this because I was young, so I hadn't quite internalized the ethos of not including in one's work anything that had to do with anything with warfare, with racism, with misogyny, that these things were not the subjects of poems. And so I think that was true for a long time. At September 11th, 2001, I think there was a sea change in the sensibility in the United States. And suddenly, because it was themselves who were terrified and who felt this on their own land, on their own, I sensed a real change. But I attribute the shift to a much greater political awareness in poetry in the US to something else. I attribute it to the emergence of voices that have been suppressed until now. So exciting poetry, in my view, in the United States is poetry being written by people of color, poetry being written by communities that have not been heard before, have not been listened to before. And so because there is a great political awareness in these communities, poetry has suddenly taken an incredible turn toward what I consider political consciousness to be, which is awareness and clarity of what circumstances are and our condition is.
So again, just thank you so much for that. It has been an incredibly wonderful experience for me to be able to talk to the two of you across so many miles and with so many challenges overcome through the wonders of technology, and some of them slightly exacerbated. But I'd just like to ask you a question which I think a lot of the writers in our audience today will be interested to know the answer to, which is to just share a little bit about how you are managing or failing to exist creatively in the current crisis. Kei, could I come to you first?
Could you not? I'm just kidding. How are we managing? Yeah, that's a hard question. I think you just are. I mean, part of life is just to be open and to listen to what's going on. I'm not sure I'm putting myself under the obligation to be creative, as if creative is somehow separate from just living and thinking and being open and hearing. I think what is interesting is how are just those dualities again, how the world is suddenly so much more silent, uh, with the absence of planes overhead, and cars in the street, but how much louder it is, how desperate we are for noise. And so the chatter online becomes desperate and manic, and I think just as a person, it's instructive. It's important to just be listening to what's happening, to how we reveal ourselves to ourselves in this time. And and so I'm not sure I'm putting myself, as I said, under any pressure to be especially profound and prophetic and poetic in this moment, but just to be present. And I don't know what I don't know what the world will be after this, but yeah, I'm trying to pay attention to it.
Yeah, I
That's
think
a
that's
kind of
immensely.
non-answer.
Yeah, well, no, I think that's immensely sensible, but also quite comforting. And I do think that we live in a world that can confuse immediacy and authenticity a lot of the time, and that doesn't actually make room for the craft side of art, and for that processing that sometimes needs to take place. And yeah, I think it's great if people can react immediately, but also it's great to kind of, as you say, just allow yourself that presence of mind and that openness. Um, and I'm also taking that as a license to spend all of tonight watching Netflix instead of trying to edit a poem. So thank you.
Yeah, completely.
And Carolyn, how are you getting on at the moment?
I find myself in complete agreement with Kei. I haven't written at all, and I haven't pressured myself to do that. I think you might have supposed once everything was canceled and you had all this time at home and solitude that you might write, but we're not in that condition. We're at home for a reason, and we're deprived of human presence. And so I think I'm trying to get in touch with how important that was. What am I longing for? What am I missing? What do I hope I will remember to value when we emerge from this? I want to remember this consciousness. I want to remember this moment. So I'm trying to just stay awake to it and take it in, pay attention. That attention is really important for poetry. And I don't think that we'll come to terms with our experience for a long time. I think it takes time. Humans need time to live through things and beyond them, and to enter the aftermath of it. And so I'm not trying to write, but I'm trying to be awake.
Yes, that's wonderful. And I think listening to you speak again, I've been struck by myself, by the simplicity of the things that I've been longing for. Like the one thing, my major fantasy for when this is over is to get on the train that stops just across the street from where I live, go to Howth, which is a small seaside town in Dublin, and eat some fish and chips. And that to me is what freedom is going to mean after the lockdown. So on that probably slightly unpoetic note, I'd like to thank you both again for a really illuminating evening of poetry. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to talk to the two of you. Thank you so much. Wonderful. In Nearby Bushes by Kei Miller and In the Lateness of the World by Carolyn Forché are both available from Charlie Burns Books.